Welcome to another exciting episode of the Business of Sound. My name is David Segura, and I'm the CEO and co-founder of Glassbox Media and the host of this podcast. As always, our goal is to provide you with actionable tips that'll help make you more successful and achieve all your dreams within podcasting. Join us every Thursday as we bring expert insights and conduct exclusive interviews with some of the industry's leading voices. But before we get started, please hit that subscribe button and help us get a 5-star rating so you can stay up to date with all the latest episodes of Business of Sound. Today we have a special episode. We're actually at the Spotify studios here in beautiful Brooklyn, and I'm joined by my co-founder, Chris Whitman, and also Nick Castner, our director of marketing. We're going to discuss our approach to podcasting partnerships at Glassbox and outline how we decide what shows to work with and what to co-produce in some cases. I think ultimately our goal is to tell you a little bit more about ourselves, but also hopefully, give some insights to podcast executives, creators, and other folks in the industry, and maybe apply some of these best practices themselves. So without further delay, let's dive into it.
Okay, so podcast partnerships. The topic today, Glassbox assigns long-term exclusive deals with podcasts, and then we support them through monetization, audience growth, and adaptations. So this whole conversation is centered around the shows we look to sign, how we do that, how we reach out, how we select shows, all of that. But just at the top, very high level here, why is this so important for the company?
Yeah, there's a lot of innovation in the creator space, the podcasting space. I kind of feel like people put their heart and soul into the work and try to do everything they can to make it special. But I know firsthand how hard it is to do podcasting. So as a result of that, we really feel that we can help them achieve, what their goals are from a revenue perspective, brand partnership perspective, derivatives perspective, and basically allow them to focus on what they care about most. That's usually the content, it's usually the storytelling. So I think there's a place in the world, not only for us, but frankly, even for companies like us, whose central mission is to help creators.
Yes, and so what type of shows? I know, like Glassbox, when we started, we were big in true crime. Is that still the case? And just for context to the listeners, I asked some of these questions to prompt the discussion. As a marketing director, I like some of these seem silly coming out of my mouth, but they're all to prompt a conversation. So because I know Chris sits in on a lot of those like early meetings with podcasters as we form that relationship, I'll kick that one to Chris.
Yeah, sure. As I like to say, we pretty much have everything but sports. But to your point, we did cut our teeth, so to speak, in true crime. Some of our first podcasts that we signed up, Going West as an example, Glassbox Media, which just came out with an awesome show called Dark Valley, all true crime. What's been interesting about that is that, as we've built brand partnerships, as we've worked to help cross-promote shows and grow their audiences, we found that building a cohort of true crime shows has made a lot of sense, and there's a lot of economies of scale that come with that. But as we've gone and expanded, talked to more buyers in the space, advertisers, that I mean by that, brand safe content like health and fitness, runs the gambit to investing, finance, social commentary. All those things are really valuable for us.
Yeah. Yes. And is there a what kind of creator, if it's fairly category / content format agnostic, what type of creator are we focusing in on?
I don't know. I think established creators, we want to work with everyone, and we certainly make exceptions from time to time. We want to work with folks that have already done the hard work, the heavy lifting of establishing their own voice, building a community of sorts, and then they most likely have somewhere between, doesn't have to be this, but 200,000 to 1 million listeners, downloads being generated every single month. And we feel like our model works best to kind of help them grow and accelerate, explore derivatives from new content offshoots. And that's what we try to stick to. I think someone who's starting from scratch or might be an amazing creative professional, but hasn't really done podcasting before, there are some, studios and I think platforms that are great for that, but maybe a little less out of our core strength.
Yeah, and I'd say also just to add to that a little bit, we do like to look at ratings a lot too. How are they ranking on Apple? How are they ranking on Spotify? Are the listeners engaged? To David's point, I think social media is important, but even more important is kind of the comment section on all those platforms. So we've been really excited to sign some pretty awesome podcasts lately that are in the tens of thousands. in terms of ratings, and in the 5-star range as well, which is good. So it's a lot of support there. So that's always really exciting for us to see too.
Yeah, and it's one of those like classic podcast tasks where like every show asks to leave a rating, but there is a real world like impact of that rating as brands or partners like us come in to strike a deal. So the how are, and again generally speaking, how are these deals structured, and like are there at like especially in relation to IP, like what's the approach to that?
We basically have two types of deals. One is standard distribution, monetization agreement, meaning that our core mission is going to be to help get their content out, provide the ad hosting if necessary, and basically monetize it. That's pretty much true for all our contracts. While the commercials can be a little different, average length is 5 years. That can also be different too, depending on the client or the partner. And then we also, where possible, to your point, we also try to do IP or development deals. And what we're trying to do there is become your minority partner. We don't want to control the editorial vision at all. It's not our strong suit. We also don't even want to be in the driver's seat. We want the creator to stay motivated. And that means literally surrendering most of the upside. But we think this allows us to basically work with different types of creators in different genres and help them explore what's appropriate. So for some people, that could be book publishing. For other people, it's TV. And we definitely have a few case studies that we can kind of speak to that are kind of getting off the ground. But we can detail everything there.
Yeah. So in those conversations, what value does Glassbox provide on the like uplifting the IP and the adaptation space?
Yeah. So the most basic is that we provide financing. We're certainly not the only ones that can do that, but when you're a creator and you're exploring, let's say, a seasonal podcast or some other type of concept, maybe adapt your like current podcast, it's not easy. And so you have to solicit funding. So in some ways we function almost as an investor. And since we now have like, sweat equity and also like literal equity in the business, we're going to try that much harder to make something happen. And taking a step back, honestly, media is just converging. The reality is there's not much of a difference anymore between TV and streaming. And I'd argue podcasting is blending into that. So the same way books were used as source material for film and TV shows, it's very true now that podcasts are becoming that as well. And so one example that I kind of speak to at a high level is Dark Valley. That's a podcast that we recently co-produced, as you know, with our friends at Glassbox Media, most famous for the Crawl Space and Missing podcast. This is a vision that I think the whole team, including Jen, really had. So we decided to obviously back the play that. And now that's obviously a top 10, like Apple and Spotify true crime hit. It's spawned quite a lot of downloads. And now we have a lot of interest from different production studios that, want to adapt it. And there's a lot of the usual suspects on the streaming side that want to buy the worldwide perpetual rights to it. So, I'm excited about that.
Yes, yeah, and more information to come eventually. That's what I was asked recently if we had a case study on any of this IP talk, and was like, we're building it as we speak. So and
these things take time too. I mean, it's been a journey. And I remember when we had these guys in the studio. What was that, 2-3 months ago, something like that?
Yeah, like 6 episodes back. So,
right, yeah. But so go listen to that one.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just been, they've been talking about it for 2 years, and they've been, working on it, and it's been amazing to see it come to fruition. It was awesome, plugging them into the Tribeca creators market, which Nick, you were pretty integral in helping support. So it's been really fun, really exciting, and yes, that case study will be great.
Yes, yeah. I remember I was on a text thread with Tim, Jen, and Lance after it launched, and it ended up charting, I think, as high as number 12 on the true crime charts on both Apple and Spotify. And I remember Lance, like on day 2, was just blowing up the group chat we all had. It was just like, this is a hit, it's doing so well. And I was sort of in the mindset of like kind of holding my breath of like, all right, this seems to be doing well, but is it doing well? And then it of course ended up being the hit that it is. Just fantastic project. On the we spoke a lot about like film and like TV adaptations. I think one interesting avenue that we continue to explore as well is with books. What's your what's Glassbox approach to turning some of these shows into books?
Meaning that everybody in media, whether in your music, whether you're in TV, whether you're in book publishing, everyone has the same sort of constraints and concerns. They're trying to lessen risk and develop new IP. The problem with that is that it's hard to take a chance on like an emerging writer, maybe someone that's never had a bestseller before. So the reason why podcasts can be an interesting way to approach this industry is that even though it is new IP, which is exciting, especially for development professionals at the book publishing level, there's an audience that can cross-sell to. So as an example, when we pitch one of our talents, there's one in particular I'm thinking right now in the philosophy sector, we're not just able to tell them that like, hey, we're going to bring to the table around 500,000 of his monthly listeners, but we can also increase that by several factors by using other podcasts that, all unrelated, also have very male concentrated audiences, and that helps lessen the risk. And it literally gives them impressions that they can use to drive book sales. And we're absolutely fine with like guaranteeing someone millions of impressions, if we get a favorable book deal for ourselves and the talent. So I think in the future, that's going to be something that we're going to be doing.
Yeah, yes. So we've discussed the type of podcast that we identify and look to go after. What's the process of like that reach out and how does that tend to work?
Yeah, it's a lot of research. I would say, so we've got our man in Nashville, Matt, kind of heads up our podcast A&R team, but he's built a pretty rigorous system of basically researching podcasts. We get a lot of support from freelancers and interns to help with this as well. But what we'll do is we'll actually just put in all the data, right? All the data points. What's it about? What's the genre? I mentioned ratings earlier. We look at that. We use tools like Podchaser to kind of think through, the probability of success or future success. Try to understand what the size is as well. And then you will listen to them. I think that's a big missing piece. What's been really interesting, how Matt's created the process for us, is that we get a lot of responses from podcast hosts, even if they're like, thanks for the outreach, but no thanks. They always kind of underscore the fact that it was really thoughtful outreach, and they really felt like, they were heard and listened to, which I think doesn't happen a lot. So we put a lot of rigor in understanding who we're reaching out to before we reach out to them, because we want the partnership to be valuable, right? At the end of the day, like David mentioned earlier, we're going for long-term exclusive contracts. As we mentioned, with like the example of Dark Valley and a few others, some of these, longer-term projects take some time to come to fruition. And, we want to make sure that it's worth everybody's while. And, as much value as we can bring to the table, we will.
Yeah, yes. And what's the approach with these podcasters, with monetization being such a big component of this deal, and like brand partnerships and ad sales being the largest pillar to that? What is the approach to setting expectations around like the brands they'll work with and that component to these deals?
Yeah, I mean, monetization is a big part of it. And we try to set like expectations, even offer minimum guarantees in some cases, or many cases, I should say. But at the same time, too, they value things like marketing and audience development. They want to talk about like where they're at now, who's in their community, and different ways we can do that. So whether it's, kind of promos and booking appearances to barter swaps, where we basically use trailers to, get impressions against unsold inventory that we have from the inventory. Those are the kind of things they want to learn more about, not because they don't know, they usually do. Some of them, more so than others, do a lot of the heavy lifting themselves, so even employ staff to help them, but it's never going to be there. It's almost every creator we talk to, they want to invest in like, shows and content and their craft, and they want to leave kind of everything else to their partner. So we think it's like helping, and there's a nice balance there between audience growth and money that really kind of matter to these creators who understand that that's their job. Increase the value of the franchise, make an outstanding living out of this, and see how far this goes.
Yeah. And especially with so many of our creators being very independent in nature, that like a lot of them grew their audience from their basement or living room, and then partnered with us with that like independent spirit. What's some resistance you hear from podcasters or who may be hesitant or skeptical of a partnership like this?
I mean, you would know more so than most, but like next week, I'm on a panel that talks about that, literally the pros and cons of joining a media company like ours or a more traditional network like other folks. Well, every creator struggles with the idea of like giving up too much independence. So there's a balance. They want to make sure they control certain things, and usually, at least in our experience, the things that are non-negotiable is ultimately control the editorial vision. And I think there's a little bit more leeway to be like, well, does this company support, my values 100%? I think it's important that there's alignment. We don't want anyone to like read or take sponsorship from someone that they fundamentally don't agree with. But I do think like they have to get used to the idea that like it's a great creative product, but fundamentally like a lot of types of content, it's ad supported. And I think it's a commercial medium. So I'm probably rambling a bit at this point, but I will say that we've certainly worked with some creators that are a little bit more commercially minded and other creators that are in it for other reasons. But I think all of them at the end of the day realize there's balance between like art and commerce.
What are some, I mean, we mentioned like total downloads and then reviews. Are there any other like KPIs that like if I was an independent podcaster sort of like looking at the marketplace, like at which point would you begin these types of conversations? And then what are like the most important like metrics to take into account and look at?
Yeah, I mean, I think size is important because we want to make sure that, what we're bringing to the table can match the expectations of the podcast host. And frequently that tends to revolve around revenue. Although I'd say we've signed a lot of podcast hosts who are also equally excited or sometimes more excited about marketing. One other metric that we're looking at a lot more, recently is, for the podcast creators who have set up their own Patreon, seeing how engaged their communities are. Oftentimes, between that and the rankings and the ratings and the reviews on, Apple and Spotify, that gives us a pretty good indicator of how, just excited their audience is about the hosts. As we know, podcasting is an influencer medium, audio influencers, and a lot of the podcast advertisers are kind of expecting the host to be able to sell through product through that, the strength of that voice. So, we look at those things to get a better indication of like how well we can, monetize the podcast and lean into that audience.
Yeah. I think just to add to that, specific to us at least, not sure for everyone, is that we do look at the U.S. geography quite a bit. In other words, right now we're at a place in time as a kind of a fast-growing startup that we want to focus on not just English-speaking countries primarily, but also those that have the majority of the audience in the U.S. We do have a number of UK-based creators that we work with to support. We find that's a market that we can monetize pretty well. But, when people tell us, we're based here in New York, definitely have representation out in California and elsewhere, I feel like that's still the central focus. So for us, that matters a lot. And then I think the other is kind of your community or even like unique listening base. Like, I certainly don't want to give too much away, but we certainly have some podcasts that are good sized, like have a large audience based on geography and also total downloads, but surprisingly have like a remarkable amount of like listens to a month essentially per user. So some of those podcasts include like Self-Helpful and others where their community is super engaged, and we do look at that. And that's something that actually matters a lot to us. They're more likely to be able to perform well, not just for brands, but for themselves and other partners as well.
Yeah, and with that example you just gave, Self-Helpful, the average listener of that show listens to 20 episodes per month, which is just a crazy consumption rate. So just goes to show like the authority and little influence he has over. So the very first episode of this feed was a sort of like kind of backstory, the story of Glassbox Media. So again, as we were taking a lesson from Gary Arndt, the Glassbox host of Everything Everywhere Daily, he has instructed us to always reference back to previous episodes. So that first episode has the backstory of the company, and in it we talk about how this is both of you two have a long history in media and entrepreneurship, but this is your first foray into podcasting. What are some of like the biggest lessons learned while creating these partnerships with creators?
For me at least, it's like obviously founder fit, just making sure that we're aligning with podcasts that we know that we can support, not just based on editorial vision, but size and scale. We've certainly done some experiments that have worked out really, really well. But to be candid, some of those experiments have been with podcasters that we know and trust. So as an example, we talked about them some, but the crawl space team with Dark Valley, like I'll be candid, like I think Chris and I are both a little bit reluctant to back the idea for this new and seasonal podcast concept, Dark Valley. Jen, Tim, Lance, the whole team is pretty passionate and they want us over, but I think frankly it's easier to say yes to that. Let's do a podcast from scratch. Let's go ahead and run 100% of this, simply because we knew it wouldn't be. We knew we were working with people who worked before, and then with your team's help on the marketing side, we knew we could basically do like almost like a blitz-like type promotion between feed drops and barter swaps and other promotion. We thought there was a good chance we could build momentum, and luckily for all of us, we did. So, at least for me, going back to the basics, you're building a company. It sounds so obvious, but it's something that people kind of like look over and move past, especially when things are happening quickly. But I think it always is a good idea to explain, like, who you support and why, and just try to limit yourself to those things.
Yeah, and I think background in media is pretty interesting. I mean, I got my career started on the buy side, so I was working at big agencies on big brands, and that can be very, very spots and dots. What I think has been really interesting, even when I was working with, for however you want to phrase it, David
alongside.
Yeah. I didn't work for you. Giant Media, that was video ad tech, still very spots and dots. And I think one of the things that's been really beautiful about podcasting is that, it's still a talent-driven business. And so while we do have the spots and dots part of the equation when we are working with brands, and even when we're thinking through media plans for cross-promotional marketing and, growing audiences, we're still dealing with people on the other side of the ball as well, and sometimes media companies. But I think listening is really important. I think every host has a different perspective or brings different perspectives to the table.
Mm-hmm.
And, being able to continuously bring the value to the table, but it's not always like standard playbook like Spots and Dots Media is.
Yeah.
We're dealing with people. We have to be very thoughtful about how we're, approaching those conversations.
Yes. Yeah. Brilliant. So one last topic to end on. There's been podcasting has had quite the year, and seems to be picking up steam again. And there were certain deals and structures of deals that kind of also came back to earth over the past 12 months. Where do you see podcast partnerships going in the year plus to come?
It's a good question, because it means something for us and the industry as a whole. I think there's a lot of overlap, but one thing I've been seeing simplistically, and just neutral comment, but a lot of European-based companies, the network and platform level, are kind of retrenching some and basically focusing more on the home market, the European continent, for lack of a better term. Maybe for that reason, we've noticed US-based podcasters are up for grabs if they're on those platforms. So without setting too aggressive or anything, like we have been, having those combos, try to see where it makes sense to work together. And if possible, try to provide more support to some of these folks that maybe feel like they're not part of the core plan anymore. Additionally, too, it's just inevitable, but mostly happy stories. Been a lot of consolidation happening in the industry right now. A lot of mergers, a lot of acquisitions. So there's always, amazing creators and content that just ends up being like not orphaned, but maybe less core to the mission. There's examples I can think of. I'm not trying to be purposely vague, but how's it all anyone to misconstrue as like an attack or something?
Yeah,
I don't feel that way, but we're aware of those trends. And so for that reason, we've been very busily trying to reach out to folks that we think are out of joint. And we've also had the pleasure of being reached out to some of those people proactively and some of their talent agents also, and try to negotiate deals that kind of work for all parties. So that's kind of where things stand, I think, on our side. And then, of course, we're just organically looking for podcasts in certain genres where we've historically done well. So Chris, you made the joke that we're, doing almost everything except for sports. That's true. We're not against sports, but at the end of the day, it's all about building scale in certain genres. So true crime is great for so many reasons. Something we can monetize well. Comedy is also something that we really believe in. We just recently signed a podcast called r/, and that was actually, credit where credit's due. Courtesy referral from Spotify.
Mm-hmm.
So double kudos to them for that, but also for hosting us today in their wonderful studio. And there's just different genres that we're trying to get behind to build more mass in. So I'm excited for the future.
Yeah. And what's interesting about sports is some of the biggest sports podcasts I can think of are very much ESPN produces that. There's not an independent creator sign-in deals. So that probably explains partially why with the independent nature of most of our creators, the sports hasn't hit a roster. Chris, any other bold predictions to add before we close up?
Not to be controversial, because I know what I'm about to say is going to be super controversial.
Clip it without any context.
But we're getting pretty excited about video as well. It's not mandatory by any means. We don't look at a podcast and say, oh, it doesn't have video, it doesn't have YouTube, so let's not sign it. But we are seeing more and more a lot of interest from brands and advertisers in being able to access audiences across both audio only and, audio video. And, I don't think it's an either or thing. I think people are consuming content wherever they want to consume it. I remember back in my 20s when Spotify came to the US, I thought they were like the best thing in the world. And YouTube came into my offices at J&J and they were like, we're number one in music. And I was like, how on earth are you possibly number one in music? There's Pandora, there's Spotify. People were building playlists of music videos on YouTube and they were listening to them or watching them or a combination of the two. And so I very much view the whole simulcast conversation through that lens. I think people are just consuming content where they want to consume it. And from our perspective, we're getting excited about that. I know Spotify and Megaphone are building a lot of tools around, ensuring that video can be distributed successfully across Spotify's apps in those environments as well. So, I'd say that's the other thing that we're looking at.
With that in mind, thanks everyone for listening to today's episode. As always, the show is produced by Erica Miranda and Nick Castner. Or if we try to produce an episode every other Thursday, we think there's more than enough content to go around, more than enough topics. So as long as you're listening, we're going to keep producing. And we do ask that you leave a 5-star review. You can buy it in your heart. Makes the show more discoverable. And it's also just a little bit extra motivation. And as always, feel free to follow Glassbox Media itself on LinkedIn, Instagram, or your social platform of choice. And with that in mind, thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.